Have you ever wondered what the very first spark of faith looked like, before temples, before gods, before words? Picture a prehistoric mother holding her child close as night falls. The air hums with unseen danger. Every rustle in the dark could be a predator, every shadow a threat. She has no language for it, yet something deep inside whispers that maybe, just maybe, there's a hidden force she could call upon for help. That primal hope, born from fear and love, may have been the first heartbeat of faith. Long before humanity named its deities, our ancestors faced a world ruled by chaos. Lightning tore the sky open, rivers flooded without warning, illness struck without explanation. For a species that depended on cooperation and care to survive, not knowing why things happened was unbearable. So they began to imagine, not for entertainment, but for survival. When logic ended, imagination stepped in, and imagination, in its purest form, became the bridge to the invisible. Imagine sitting beside a fire that's barely keeping the darkness at bay. The flames flicker, painting faces with orange light, and the smell of smoke mixes with fear. The tribe huddles closer. Someone, perhaps the oldest among them, raises a hand toward the stars and murmurs something, half sound, half feeling. Maybe it's gratitude for surviving the day. Maybe it's a plea for protection. No one knows for sure. But in that moment, a new idea is born, that invisible forces can listen, protect, and maybe even love. This instinct to protect offspring was likely the emotional root of that belief. The drive to keep children safe pushed our ancestors to seek meaning in everything around them. If their young survived after a ritual, it wasn't random, it was proof that something had heard them. Slowly, fear transformed into reverence. The unknown became sacred. That's how faith may have started, not with theology, but with an emotional reflex. The fear of loss mixed with the hope of protection. A desperate call to the unseen that echoed through generations until it became religion. And maybe, in a quiet way, that ancient instinct still lives in us. Each time we whisper a wish, or thank the universe for a moment of safety. If this glimpse into the dawn of faith fascinated you, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment telling me, do you think faith began with fear or with love? When did faith stop being a whisper and start taking shape? After countless generations of fear and wonder, humans began to give names to the invisible. The wind was no longer just a force, it was a spirit. The river wasn't only water, it had a mood, a will, a personality. Nature, vast and unpredictable, became alive with intention. For the first time, humanity wasn't alone. Early humans didn't separate the physical from the spiritual. The rustle of leaves, the crack of thunder, the sparkle of dawn, all carried meaning. Each sound, each storm, each season had a purpose, a message. These weren't yet gods, not in the way later civilizations would imagine them. They were presences, watchful, mysterious, and deeply personal. A child's survival after a harsh winter might be seen as a gift from the river's guardian, a failed hunt as a punishment from the wind. Reality became a conversation between the visible and the unseen. But this wasn't blind superstition. It was early philosophy. Our ancestors were trying to understand cause and effect in a world without science. They saw the rhythm of birth and death, the cycle of day and night, and sensed a hidden order. Something was managing it all, something far bigger than themselves. Their faith wasn't about worship, it was about connection. It was about belonging to a universe that felt alive. And that connection brought comfort. Believing that spirits moved through nature meant they were never truly powerless. They could plead, negotiate, apologize. They could act. And in that action, through gestures, words, or offerings, they found meaning, purpose, and hope. The first step toward what we now call religion had begun. The flames of belief were spreading, carried by every story told beside the fire. But soon, those spirits of nature would evolve into something even more defined. Entities that demanded respect, sacrifice, and loyalty. The dawn of divine beings was coming next. The night sky must have felt like an endless stage of power and mystery. Imagine a storm breaking over a prehistoric plain, blinding flashes tearing across the heavens, thunder rolling through the bones of the earth. For early humans, this wasn't just weather. It was a voice. Something immense and alive was speaking, demanding attention, perhaps even reverence. Fire, thunder, lightning. Each became a message from forces beyond comprehension. The discovery of fire itself might have been the most spiritual event in human history. One moment, it was destruction, devouring forests and animals without mercy. The next, it became salvation, warmth, protection, light. It was both enemy and ally, feared and worshipped. Around those flickering flames, people began to sense a divine duality, creation and destruction in one glowing breath. Fire didn't just cook food, it ignited belief. Thunderstorms, too, shaped the emotional landscape of early spirituality. To stand beneath the roar of the sky and survive was to witness power and mercy combined. No wonder later civilizations saw gods in the clouds, Zeus, Thor, Indra. But long before those names, the emotion was already there. Awe. The understanding that something ruled above them and that survival depended on staying in harmony with it. This awe slowly turned into ritual. Perhaps they threw branches into the fire as offerings, or whispered words into the wind during a storm. Each gesture was an attempt to communicate, to thank, to calm, to connect. In their eyes, the universe wasn't cold or indifferent. It responded, it punished, it rewarded. And that belief made the world feel less random, more human. As millennia passed, this dialogue with nature deepened. Faith became less about fear and more about relationship, a living exchange between people and the powers that surrounded them. But the next step would transform this fragile bond into something structured, something intentional. The birth of ritual itself. Picture a small group gathered in a cave, their faces glowing in the light of a trembling fire. The hunt had been difficult, and one of them, perhaps the eldest, steps forward, holding a piece of meat high toward the smoke. The gesture is slow, deliberate. It's not just gratitude, it's a plea. This offering, they believe, will keep the spirits of the hunt pleased and the tribe alive. Here, in that humble act, lies the origin of ritual, the moment faith began to take physical form. For our ancestors, survival was unpredictable. A good hunt could mean life, a failed one could bring starvation. So they created patterns, repeated actions that gave them a sense of control over chaos. Every gesture, every chant, every shared rhythm became a bridge between the seen and the unseen. They weren't performing for spectacle, they were negotiating with existence itself. These early rituals weren't about religion as we know it. They were emotional technology, ways to manage fear, grief, and hope. Before language could explain the world, ritual allowed them to feel it, to shape it. Dancing before a hunt, painting bodies with ash, arranging stones in circles. Each movement whispered the same question: will this keep us safe? And when it worked, when the rain came or a hunt succeeded, the ritual became sacred. Success meant the spirits had answered. Failure meant the ritual had been broken or that someone had angered the unseen. The emotional feedback loop was powerful. Rituals became memory. Memory became tradition. Tradition became belief. It's easy to see echoes of this even today, in how we still repeat gestures for comfort or whisper a quick hope before facing danger. The same ancient rhythm continues, woven into our modern lives like an invisible thread from the caves of our ancestors. If this glimpse into the roots of human ritual makes you wonder what ancient gestures still live within us, leave a comment below. Do you think rituals gave birth to belief, or belief created rituals? Long before written words, before books, before even structured speech, our ancestors found ways to communicate with the invisible. They sang, they hummed, they clapped, they gestured. Every sound and movement was a thread in a tapestry connecting the human to the unseen. The first language of faith was not about grammar. It was about emotion. It was about making the intangible tangible. Consider the hum of a lullaby beside the fire, the rhythm, the vibration, the warmth of a parent's voice. These were more than comfort. They were messages to the spirits. Protect my child, keep them safe tonight. Similarly, a sudden yell after a successful hunt or a stomp around a newborn's cradle was both celebration and invocation. Each sound resonated, reaching ears seen and unseen, binding the community together while calling upon protective forces. Symbols emerged too. Rocks arranged in circles, lines etched in caves, handprints pressed into soft clay. These were more than art. They were statements, prayers frozen in time. Even without a formal system, humans intuitively understood that certain shapes and arrangements could carry power. Touch, sight, and sound were all channels to the same goal, connection with forces beyond their comprehension. By using gestures, chants, and symbols, early humans were building the foundation for complex spiritual systems. They discovered that intention mattered. The act itself could influence the world. These were the seeds of ritual language, the precursors to prayer, meditation, and sacred texts. And while the words themselves would come much later, the drive to communicate with the unseen had already shaped the course of human evolution. The next step in this journey would confront the ultimate mystery, death, and the profound questions it raised about what might lie beyond. Death is the ultimate unknown. For early humans, it wasn't just an end, it was a mystery that demanded acknowledgement. Imagine a child witnessing the loss of a parent or a tribe, seeing a beloved elder fade away. Confusion, grief, and fear would be overwhelming. And yet, out of that fear, a profound sense of connection emerged. They began to treat the dead differently, carefully placing bodies in specific positions, covering them with stones, or leaving gifts beside them. These were the first gestures toward what we now call spiritual practice. Burial rituals likely served multiple purposes. Practically, they protected the living from disease, but emotionally and spiritually, they offered a framework for understanding loss. The very act of honoring the dead acknowledged that life was not isolated. There was a continuum, an invisible thread linking the living and the departed. For children, witnessing such care and ritual could reinforce the belief in protective, unseen forces watching over them. Artifacts found in prehistoric graves tell us more. Beads, tools, ochre, and even animal bones suggest a belief in an afterlife, a world beyond immediate perception. They believed that some essence of a person, soul, spirit, or life force, continued. Death was no longer purely natural. It was a passage, a transformation, a journey guided by unseen powers. And by engaging in these practices, communities could express both fear and hope, grief and reverence. Through these rituals, early humans created a narrative that gave death meaning. It reassured them that life wasn't arbitrary, and that their children were entering a world where guidance, though invisible, might always be present. The sacred care for the dead helped cement the foundations of human spirituality, connecting survival instincts with reverence for the mysteries of existence. If this insight into ancient burials and the origins of spiritual thought makes you reflect on your own traditions, leave a comment below. How do you honor the invisible forces in your life today? As human communities grew, so did their understanding of vulnerability. Children were especially precious, yet perilously exposed to predators, illness, and the whims of nature. To safeguard them, our ancestors began creating protectors, figures, talismans, and charms designed to channel the unseen forces that watched over life. These weren't just superstitions, they were embodiments of hope and intention. Clay figurines, carved animals, and painted symbols served as guardians. A small effigy placed beside a sleeping child might represent a spirit that fights unseen dangers. Sometimes the objects were worn, sometimes placed at the entrances of shelters. Each one was a tangible connection to the invisible, a medium through which humans could express care, fear, and love simultaneously. Stories told by elders often reinforced these protective roles. A narrative about a great spirit punishing those who neglected their children could both teach and inspire. Legends became moral frameworks, subtly guiding behavior while strengthening faith in unseen guardians. In this way, the protection of children was entwined with the development of early spiritual systems. These practices highlight a universal human instinct, the desire to intervene in the face of danger, even when the threat cannot be confronted directly. By invoking protective forces, early humans found a sense of agency in a chaotic world. Every charm, ritual, or whispered plea was a bridge between vulnerability and power. Reflecting on these ancient practices, we can still see traces of them in our modern lives. From lullabies to nightlights, we continue to seek ways, both practical and symbolic, to shield those we love. What protective traditions or objects do you keep around your family? Share your thoughts in the comments below. In every ancient community, someone emerged as a guide, an interpreter of the invisible, a mediator between the living and the forces beyond. These early shamans and spiritual leaders were not just storytellers. They were visionaries who could sense patterns, foresee dangers, and advise the tribe. Their authority came from perceived connection to the unseen, a skill nurtured over countless generations. Shamans used dreams, trance, and ritual to communicate with spirits. They carried knowledge of plants, seasons, and animals, intertwining practical survival with spiritual guidance. To their communities, this dual role was invaluable. It was faith and reason working side by side. When a child fell ill, the shaman didn't simply treat symptoms. They called upon invisible forces to restore balance, invoking chants, symbols, or objects believed to channel protective energy. Their influence extended beyond health. Shamans shaped rites of passage, guided hunts, and preserved the oral history that carried lessons from one generation to the next. They ensured that knowledge of rituals, protective charms, and sacred places remained intact, weaving spirituality into the fabric of everyday life. Their existence demonstrates that early human faith wasn't random. It was organized, purposeful, and deeply intertwined with survival. Through these figures, our ancestors learned that belief could be structured. Spiritual leadership created cohesion, giving people shared symbols, chants, and rituals. It transformed fear into strategy and vulnerability into guidance. The shaman's presence reassured the tribe that the invisible wasn't indifferent. It could be engaged, influenced, and even persuaded. As humanity evolved, the seeds planted by these first leaders grew into more complex religious hierarchies, but their core mission remained the same: to protect, guide, and interpret the invisible. As humans transitioned from small, nomadic bands to more stable communities, their beliefs began to evolve and unify. The invisible forces they once addressed in isolated rituals now became part of shared cultural systems. A child growing up in these tribes witnessed not just individual acts of faith, but collective expressions, festivals, seasonal rites, and group prayers. Belief was no longer only personal, it was social. These tribal practices helped strengthen cohesion and survival. Shared rituals created trust and mutual understanding, while common stories and myths provided moral guidance. Each legend, each sacred symbol, was a reminder that the tribe existed within a cosmos populated by forces beyond sight. The actions of the community mattered because they were participating in a dialogue with the same invisible powers that shaped their environment and destiny. Symbols, dances, and chants became standardized across groups. Protective figures evolved into more complex spiritual hierarchies, while shamans or leaders coordinated communal rituals that reinforced collective identity. Children learned early that faith wasn't optional. It was embedded in daily life, from how they approached the hunt to how they honored their dead. These formative experiences ensured the continuity of belief across generations. This social dimension of faith also allowed the development of moral systems. Actions were evaluated not just for immediate survival, but for their spiritual consequences. Tribes internalized a sense of accountability to the unseen, and rituals began to structure social behavior. From small family units to cohesive tribal societies, faith became both a shield against fear and a glue that bound people together. The final evolution of these systems would leave a lasting imprint on humanity, a legacy that survives in forms both subtle and profound, even millions of years later. Even millions of years after the first sparks of faith, the echoes of our ancestors' beliefs are still with us. The protective instincts, rituals, and stories passed down through countless generations formed the foundation of what we now call spirituality. The invisible forces they once feared and revered continue to shape our thoughts, our traditions, and even the ways we nurture the next generation. When we light a candle, whisper a prayer, or tell a child, "You are safe," we are participating in the same timeless dialogue with the unseen that began in prehistoric caves. Every act of hope, every gesture of protection is a thread in a tapestry woven by human experience over millennia. Faith may have started as a survival mechanism, but it evolved into something more, a way to make sense of life, to connect with one another, and to honor the mysteries we cannot fully understand. And yet, the story is not just about survival. It's about continuity, imagination, and the human need to belong to a universe larger than ourselves. The rituals, symbols, and figures created by early humans may have been simple, but they carried profound power. They taught us that love, fear, and hope are inseparable, and that our desire to protect and connect can give life meaning beyond the visible world. So next time you pause in awe of nature, tell a child a story, or perform a quiet ritual of your own, remember that you are walking a path carved by millions of years of human faith. Our ancestors' whispers are still there, urging us to notice, to protect, and to believe. If you enjoyed this journey through time, subscribe, like this video, and comment below with the phrase, "I honor the invisible," to share your connection. And don't stop here. Watch our next video to discover how ancient spiritual practices shaped the civilizations we know today.